Are we good?
Okay, I think we're good. It's loading Zoom.
Okay.
I'm trying to figure out what the timing is on that, whether it takes the entire time for the scroll bar to get there, but because it
Yeah.
says it's begun, so I think we're
Oh,
go ahead ready to start.
okay. Oop, hold on. I just heard back from Jeremy. He never got an email, he said.
Okay.
Uh, when and where and how to access. He didn't have it.
Okay. I have his email. Summer had reached out for me.
Okay.
But I'll send that Zoom link.
Okay. He
Right.
said he said unfortunately he's nowhere near a computer right now, or he could
Oh,
or he
okay.
would join. But yeah, maybe go
Okay.
ahead and send if he wants to try to do what I'm doing and do it over the phone.
Right.
Yeah, it's hard, I think, when people first get started. We should definitely make a practice of not just sending it to their new city email, because I feel like a lot of those aren't set up yet.
Right.
If you have his personal email, that'd probably be the best bet.
I think that's what Summer was able to snag for me. Let's see.
Sorry,
yeah,
folks.
Here we go.
Stand by. Ruben, your face is looking all clean.
I know. Somebody shaved it off. I don't know what happened.
I like it. Looks good.
Woke up and it was gone.
Okay, it sounds like Jeremy likely won't be able to make it just because he didn't get the info cross wires, which is totally okay. So I'm going to go ahead and call us to order. We do not have a quorum, so I'm going to just say that we don't have a quorum. Am I good to go, Corey?
We are. We can move through the agenda and then just we won't address the improvements. We can't table because we can't make motions, but we'll just move past that. But we could open for citizens.
Yeah, totally. Okay. I call to order this February 10th, 2022 meeting of the Moab City Planning Commission at 6:08 p.m. First item of business, as a matter of course, we do not have a quorum. We only have 3 planning commission members currently in attendance, so we will not be able to carry out any official business or vote on any recommendations this evening. But we're still holding a gathering because we have updates from staff and updates from guests about some things in the works at the city planning stage. The first item of business on that is citizens to be heard. So if you had comments you emailed in, if you're present in the waiting room, either on the phone or on Zoom right now, this would be the time. I think, Corey, do we have anyone waiting to?
It looks like we just have one person. Okay. I don't know if they're attached to our discussion, but we'll go ahead and let them in. Looks like audio is connected. Hey there, we're in Citizens to be Heard. Are you participating in wanting to, and it's Sam, voice Citizens to be Heard? Are you a part of the project?
I am. I would like to speak on Citizens be Heard. I know that, may I begin?
Yeah, now's the time.
Very good.
State your name. Yeah, that would be helpful.
My name is Sam Van Wetter. I'm a resident of Moab. I know that tonight the Moab City Planning Commission is going to be seeing a presentation about the overlay for the revising the R3 and R4 zones. I know that previous discussions have mentioned that a 33% figure for workforce housing in all developments in R3 and R4 will be sufficient. I'm here to say that I think that is too low a number. This is a great opportunity for the City Planning Commission to set some really high goals for the amount of employee housing, of employed local housing that can be in each new development. I don't have that perfect number, but let's aim for the stars here. Let's have 50% or more of those new rooms be going to increase workforce housing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sam. Really appreciate that.
Thank you, Sam. Okay, do we have any other citizens to be heard this evening?
We do not. And Sam, if you're still on, you are welcome. We're going to move back into the waiting room, or you can head back to YouTube and watch the full presentation here. So we're just going to take you out of the access room here. Thank you. All right, we don't have anybody else in the waiting room right now, and ready to move forward.
Okay,
Oh, and
we are,
also no comments were submitted
Yeah.
for citizens to be heard prior to the meeting.
yes, I did see that. So we are going to skip our third item on the agenda because we do not have a quorum, so we can't officially vote on anything, which would have been approval of minutes from past commission meetings. We're going to go straight to number 4, which is a discussion item, a staff update on resolution 33, 2021, R3 and R4 active employment household requirement code amendments. This will be a briefing and a discussion and a presentation by, I'm so sorry, I'm looking at my tiny phone screen, by Matt Cauda, BAE Urban Economics, regarding the development code amendment support research. All right, Matt and or Corey, take it away.
Perfect. Thank you. I'll introduce briefly. Instead of Matt, we have from BAE, Hussein, who's going to be participating in the presentation today.
Oh, sorry, Aaron.
That's just last minute changes, but
Okay.
really appreciate Aaron's contribution so far. We've been coordinating this week in advance, so along with Matt, but Aaron has been in close contact so far. So we have a slideshow presentation. If you are able to watch the city council presentation on Tuesday, it's going to mirror that fairly close. We do have updated materials, and then of course Aaron's contribution specifically with the scope of work for BAE. So with that being said, my hope is to move through this at a steady pace. It is a 15 slide presentation, but don't want to move quite as quick as we did with city council, given they're on a tight schedule. It was important to move through that material, but here we have that opportunity to really break down. So if at any point during the presentation we want to break for some questions and discussion, we can do that. And then certainly at the end, really looking forward to diving into a full discussion about the concept. All right. So to set the stage of where we're hoping to take this, this was a review of the history, coordination to date, the process we're looking at, time frame and requirements, framework of the actual ordinance, and next steps. But what we're talking about, just for to bring it back even a step further, is in October of 2021, the city council passed a resolution and enacting the pending ordinance doctrine, allowing the city to work on the substantial ordinance for the main body of what this resolution content is. So the section we're really trying to focus on here, see if I can highlight, is for a requirement that some of the units, or excuse me, back up even a little bit further, that for as we're moving forward in the R3, R4, and R2 zone, R2 zone was included, but currently does not permit multi-household. So as we're looking at the R3, R4 multi-household use, when projects come in, a requirement that some of the units qualify as our new active employment household definition, or be subject to a deed restriction regulating the use of those units. As so, if we need to deviate away from AEH, will be that acronym that we're going to start using moving forward. That's the current process, or the current status. We are within that time frame, so it gave us 180 days from October 12th to conclude and approve the ordinance that would be the prevailing and governing ordinance. This resolution is merely that between that time and now that we are doing work to design that ordinance, there wouldn't be able to be a influx or a rush of applications that would be trying to beat the ordinance. That's the purpose of a pending ordinance doctrine, is it gives us a little time to work without having to feel pressured, while we can engage in the public without that rush to beat restrictions. We're going to be on a pretty tight time frame, given it was back in October, and now we're with the election of the new council and mayor, the mayor giving determinative affirmation that we are moving forward in January. So it's basically starting January, we're getting going. So we had a little bit of a delay with the turnover of city leadership, but to even backtrack a bit further of why this resolution was in place, that in 2020 to 2021, we saw a huge influx of development in our R3 and R4 zones that was essentially removing or redeveloping existing housing on smaller density lots, typically historic and or mobile home park properties, and then redeveloping specifically for luxury townhome and luxury condo developments geared towards second home type buyers. So what they did was create an imbalance in our housing stock, particularly in our most susceptible and fragile housing stock. To talk about R3 and R4 and where those are located, this orange band is our R3 zone. R4 are these pink sections that we're seeing mostly on the west side. There are a few other sections throughout the city. Let's see here. Okay, this tool might not work, but if you can follow my mouse as we track here, there's essentially a square or rectangular polygon around the center of the city. This is the original town site division for the city of Moab, the historic town of Moab. So within that, there's a large part of that is in this R3, which is designed to be our multi-household zone. One of our more dense zones, the R4 being our manufactured housing zone, a more dense zone than R3, but designed towards mobile home parks, manufactured housing. So while we placed that band close to our central commercial, which is a typical zoning orientation, it placed that density zone over some of our most historic and less dense parcel areas. So moving forward, this is an update. You may have seen this matrix before when we initiated the resolution. It's been updated with current numbers and additional projects. But what we had been dealing with was before this orange band came in. So now that we have that, we can see essentially the names of the projects. It's going to be quite small. I apologize. I can certainly send this to anybody that's viewing that would like a closer look and explain a little further for any commissioners that are having a hard time seeing. But name of the project, some of those are redacted for sake that they're in concept. We haven't officially received an official application. Therefore, it is not into the public realm of plan view yet. But with these being fairly serious, they're worth note. We do get a lot of concept plans that are not very serious. They're very just testing the waters of what could happen, but these are moving toward direction of proposal, whether submitted a pre-application or not yet. But what we're looking for in here is obviously the unit counts, but on this band of color, the darker color is what you're typically going to see as a more high level or could be geared towards luxury style, whether it be condos or townhomes. The lighter color is oriented towards apartments, or in this one situation, a bunkhouse or employee specific style development. With the approvals, you can see with the Walnut Lane for the pad down here, it did have the existing dwellings accommodated. But what we're seeing up here is those mobile home parks that are being removed and then replaced. So we're actually losing affordable housing units in these projects prior to this ordinance coming in. Overall, it's just on the board right now. And this is excluding some other large projects, of course, not within these zones, but 2 units at about 1,000 new dwelling units coming online in the next couple of years here, potentially, with the removal of 31, what I'm going to call extremely attainable or affordable units for locals. So with this new ordinance, what we're attempting to do is 208 of those units, 92 will be active employment household restricted. So with this ordinance, we're going to gain of this group 92 units of what could be, a potential subtraction of 31. So negative units to a positive of 92. To date, so far, we've been coordinating with BAE Urban Economics Council, Aaron Hussein. Aaron's here tonight. He's going to be able to speak about the coordination, scope of work, and hopefully tasks and timelines that we're trying to coordinate. And then also with our consulting land use attorney, Snow Christian Martineau, we've had Robert Keller and Danny Kaepernick involved with our Cane Creek rezone and development agreement that we've just completed. And then Nate Mitchell will be brought on board and is somewhat of a legal specialist with exactions and exaction territory type situations. So we'll be very happy to include Nate. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Aaron to describe BAE's work.
Great. Thank you, Corey. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting us to participate on this project. Again, my name is Aaron Hussein. I'm an associate principal with BAE Urban Economics. I've worked closely with managing principal Matt Coda for many, many years now. I believe he was the primary author of your assured housing ordinance, and we were excited to be invited to participate in this project as well. At the city's request, we've developed a scope of work to try and collect and analyze some data to help the city understand long-term workforce housing needs and the extent to which new development may be able to accommodate some of that. We've broken our work scope into three main tasks. The first task is looking at elements of policy that is being enacted in other communities that might help inform what the city is trying to do. Some good examples include, and many of you may be familiar with some of these examples, places like Vail, Colorado. They have a workforce housing deed restriction purchase program. A recent project in Truckee, California, where I personally live, where a project was set aside as 100% workforce housing as a alternative compliance option for complying with the town's inclusionary policy. As far as I know, there isn't a community that's doing exactly what Moab is trying to do. That said, there are a variety of examples that have various elements that may be informative for the town to consider. So that's the main focus of task one. Task two is really focused on looking at long-term build out of the Moab community, looking at total residential growth, total job generating land use growth through build out. And we'll be looking at the total workforce housing demand that would be generated throughout that process. And we'll also be generating estimates of the percentage of that total workforce need that the community is looking to try and accommodate or house within the community. We'll be breaking this out into a couple of different pieces. In particular, we like to break out these types of numbers into what we call catch up and keep up. So the catch-up demand is essentially the existing unmet workforce housing need within the community today. And then the keep-up number is looking forward. So as new development occurs, how much of that new workforce housing demand needs to be accommodated within new projects to make sure you're providing the needed workforce housing moving forward on an ongoing basis. And then ultimately that will help inform sort of a high-end estimate of the portion of new projects that may need to be set aside as workforce housing in order to meet the community's goals. Next slide. So then task three is looking at more of the sort of low end threshold of the sort of minimum amount of workforce housing that new projects should be required to provide in order to, at a minimum, offset their own impacts on workforce housing demand within the community. And for residential projects, we usually focus this as a nexus analysis. And we have done this for quite a few communities throughout the country. In many cases, there's an income cap focus. And I know that's not the emphasis here, but we can easily adjust our methods to accommodate that. And essentially what we're looking at is for each new residential unit built, the occupying household, based on an assumed household income, will be spending money within the community. That then creates demand for new workers to staff grocery stores, restaurants, city services, etc. And so we'll be looking at the new workforce demand that's generated per household, and then again applying that threshold or that share of the portion of that total demand that the community wants to house locally. And that will again inform that sort of lower level threshold. Under tasks 4 and 5, we'll be preparing draft and final memoranda that sort of summarize the analyses. And we're committing to participating in up to 4 virtual meetings to discuss the analyses and discuss various policy options with local leadership as well as members of the community. We're also open to potentially augmenting the scope further as needed. And of course, we'd have to work through the city's process in order to do that. But we're happy to craft whatever scope is necessary to meet the community's needs. And with that, I'll pass it back to Corey. Thank you much.
Thank you so much, Aaron. Moving a little bit beyond where we're at with coordination is into process, what it is needing to do to accomplish this ordinance. And it would really follow our development code amendment applications, very similar to a rezone, as we're doing a general land use code update. So the requirements for that include the notification requirements for public newspapers, public outreach. It does exempt us from the mailing to individuals and property postings, given it's a general land use update. So we are in essence updating the whole city. So there isn't a particular zone, even though we are emphasizing the R3, R4 that need to be notified specifically. So very clear about our requirements for notification, but of course, coordinating with our communications director. And when we get to timeline, we'll talk a little bit about this, but an advanced element of process that we're wanting to include through public engagement. So not necessarily outreach, but engaging with the community to hear, like Sam, the concepts that the community is hoping to address prior to the drafting the ordinance so that we can implement components of that. Following that process of notification, we'd be moving within a public hearing that would be held prior to the planning commission meeting. So typically, just like we do for a rezone, with recommendation coming from planning commission as the advisory body, then moving on to city council as the final approval land use authority. So relatively straightforward process, but with Moab's history of desire and the city's desire from the council and administrative leadership to engage public on these broader topics as much as possible, we are going to go above and beyond what is required here. A little bit more about process. What if with the public, anytime we have an opportunity to engage about what we're trying to do by the means of land use code to create workforce housing, which is a very broad term. I usually describe it as a stool with 3 legs. The opportunities that we have to do that are through ownership requirements, affordability requirements, and occupancy. Things like our planned affordable development, the PAD, or like the county's HDHO, utilize all 3 legs of the stool. What we're looking here is to simply focus on the occupancy component. The reason that this matters is there are terms in zoning that like inclusionary zoning or exclusionary zoning. So a form of inclusionary zoning situation, but whether it's voluntary or mandatory, is creating an exaction situation requiring, like Aaron talked about, that essential nexus and rough proportionality. Basically, what you're drawing out of these developers needs to be tied legitimately to what it is you're asking. So you can't have an over ask from developers. It needs to be balanced. A voluntary situation would be the PAD. The developer can come in, either develop by right or engage in our PAD ordinance, utilizing that land use restriction agreement that Laura, for a density bonus in a trade-off for affordability. And we've had that process laid out through that legal negotiation. A mandatory example would be our WAHU, which was in connection to our overnight accommodations ordinance. So where a overnight accommodation would come in, they would be mandated to participate in this WAHU. And then through that LURA, determine how many affordable units or a fee in lieu, whatever options are laid out in that LURA. What that component of that tripping mechanism that we're talking about is a legal exaction situation. The Office of the Property Rights Ombudsman for Utah has a really great step-by-step walkthrough as far as what an exaction is, when it is required, what the elements are, what the legal process to pursue or to stay outside of that situation would be. So that's the link. I can send that hyperlink to anybody that is watching at home. Just contact the planning department, or if you're able to get a copy of this, we can send that to you as well. But the important factor here is that currently we are not identifying this ordinance as an exaction situation, given we are focusing on this occupancy component. PAE's participation with our WAHU was because we did create that exaction component there. So it is a legal zoning process to go either way, but in what we're doing here, there is no trade-off. We're not asking for anything out of developers. We're simply designing our zoning code the way we'd like to, just like we would. It's not exactly the same as development standards. It's a little different. But the way we have placed a overnight accommodation restriction on all residential builds. So currently you in any residential zone are not permitted to create an overnight accommodation. That follows the same process that we're kind of following now, except what we're looking at here is a percentage element, which is why it gets a little bit more gray. So again, pedaling back a little bit to our contributions with Snow Christian and Robert Keller, who's our consulting land use attorney. This is an excerpt from an email, and I hope that's okay that we're using this, but it really clearly identifies kind of the territory we're in. Is the quote, "I think you can fairly state that we don't see any issues at first blush," meaning we're not tripping into an exaction territory, particularly with BAE's involvement, which is consistent with the general impression. However, we do want to look at the final materials provided for more detail, giving the ordinance a definitive blessing, meaning until we have the actual draft ordinance, there isn't any way for our land use attorneys to really decide what it is we're doing. So we do need to create those materials to ensure that we are not tripping into any unsupported exactions. And if we are going an exaction route, that we have the material or essential nexus rough proportionality to pursue that. So that's this little note here is currently why we, despite us hoping to engage this ordinance on that level, which is not an exaction situation, but yet we are including BAEs because we want to more robust support whatever determinations we make, saying we truly believe that this is the accurate response. We're not just going to send out a kind of a bland arbitrary ask. We're rooting our decisions in those data, and that's been a request out of the council and I think out of staff to more completely propose this ordinance. As like Aaron said, we're kind of in new territory. The concept has been applied in many places in many different ways, but with our familiarity that we have kind of in the West here, we haven't seen, to our knowledge, anybody that's doing quite exactly what we're doing. So that additional support, I think, is pretty necessary. This is one of the timetables that has been amended from the city council's presentation. The reason being is we did run, and this is my fault, check your calendars. If you type in 180 days following October 12th, there are some accommodations where the calculations get different. So anyway, April 10th instead of April 12th is the correct closing of our pending ordinance doctrine. So that did amend the scale a little bit by 2 days. which doesn't have a huge factor, then it echoes through some of these early April dates as far as our last chance opportunities. So we've decided that we are going with what was either a fast track or last track, as in our last option to get through. The last track gives us the most amount of time and most exposure with the Planning Commission, public engagement, and City Council. So it's kind of a no-brainer. But what we want to build in here is a kind of a fail-safe that if at City Council final approval on March 31st, we can't get it done for whatever reason, we do have some backup special meetings that we could accomplish it before April 10th. The pressure to accomplish this within that pending ordinance timeline is that we need to clarify this maybe a little bit more. So I'll have Robert at some point clarify further. But what our rights are is that right now we have a number of projects on that last slide that you saw with the orange bar that are all pending ordinance related. So those 92 units that are currently in the process and following the resolution guidelines, which are hardly clarified. So we have generated to the best of our ability what is the most reasonable path forward and enforceable at the moment based off of what we're doing. So the the development agreement for Cane Creek was a result of these conversations. So there's some misunderstanding. The DA, the development agreement for Cane Creek, is setting a precedent that we're now following. The DA was drafted by city staff and our consulting land use attorneys for the developer to sign. So there's a little bit of a misunderstanding that the DA was thought to have been developed by the developer, which it was not. At the time, that was what we felt was the appropriate number and appropriate enforcement regulations and requirements to move through these, I think, 6 or 7 projects that we can't tell them just wait. So we have to give them something and some opportunity to move forward. So that's what we're doing. I've lost a track here, but the idea is we're here now. Month of February, month of March is going to be very, very busy for us. But the idea would be we're beginning outreach for these city council and public or planning commission workshops, hoping to have coordination with BAE and then potentially some presentations from Snow Christensen as well. But these are regular meetings, so 2 weeks apart, into what will be a special meeting for the Planning Commission public hearing and recommendation, and a special meeting for City Council final approval. We needed to make both of these special meetings in order to accommodate for these last minute opportunity approval meetings here. This flip-flops a little bit. So on March 29th, that's a Tuesday, and March 31st is a Thursday. So Planning Commission and City Council will switch in this occasion because we will need that planning public hearing and commission recommendation prior to the first time that City Council can officially hear the ordinance as a action item. We'll up to that point have it as a workshop item. All right, so bear with me a little bit longer. Talking about the framework, this is really highlighting what our current pending ordinance document status is and with the projects under review, where we're going with this. With our ADU ordinance update that we had, we did approve the active employment household definition and qualifications, as well as by association, the process, approval, and enforcement of what and where those things are or are not. So we have that already codified and built into the code. Where we're at here with the 33% dedication restriction is, and so that is the ordinance. It's two lines. It's pretty dang simple at the base, but of course there is a bunch of material that is underneath it supporting it. So while the line or the amendment to the code may be short or a few lines, the material that supports it is going to be fairly substantial. But with that 33% dedication restriction, we've also needed to include what it is to be roughly proportional in type and size, meaning when a project comes in, they couldn't dedicate 33% of, so everything else is big, shiny, very, very nice luxury. And then you over here in the corner put, if it's three, let's keep it simple. It's a triplex, three units. Two of the units would be really big, really fancy. One unit would be stuck over in the corner with diminished quality, a diminished type and size, i.e. bedroom content, or what it is, whether it's a townhome, a condo, or anything else. So what we're trying to avoid is isolation and by de facto reduced quality for there. So it's, you propose a product and you have to cut it right down the third. So if you have 33 3 bedrooms, you'll have to have 11 of those 3 bedrooms as active employment. So I won't beat this to death. It's a little complex, but I think everyone is on the same page here. This is determined at the planning commission level. So when these projects come through a site plan, the planning commission has the authority to say, this is roughly proportional, because it's not exact and we don't want it to be exact. There's many cases where, there might be an unequal number of 3 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms, but it's the planning commission's job to determine, is the intention shown, which I think with most developers at this point, it's pretty clear they don't want their projects to have that division. They want it to feel cohesive and work well for each other. Each phase of a development would have to have its proportional 33%. And then further occupancy definitions and defaults when you are and when you are not a qualified active employment household, the review, approval, and enforcement of those elements. And then of course the deed restriction requirement itself, what the language is that is going to go into that deed restriction. Hold on one moment, my computer's dying. I need to plug it in. So pause for just a moment. And if you have any questions, we can come back and address this. I'm sorry about that. It's amazing what running a few different programs will do to your battery. Okay. Do we have any questions so far? We're almost done with framework and nearly done with the presentation. Okay, we'll carry on. Really appreciate Sam's comment at our Citizens to be Heard for this meeting, expressing a desire for an increased number than 33%. Why we are currently functioning under 33%, I think is an important notion for the public right now, as that is how we are functioning for those proposed developments. First of all, a percentage basis, why we've picked a percentage over square footage or a monetary amount in that development is it becomes essentially a very static, repeatable, reviewable, and enforceable function for the planning department to evaluate projects. If we start breaking into square footages of this many types of units and how that works, it takes advanced coordination between the architect of the project and the planning department. It's not impossible. It certainly can be done, but it does take an architect really to help us evaluate that. What we're hoping to do, because this is a by right multi-household, 3 units or more, so we have many locals who are building threeplexes, fourplexes, multiple threeplexes, or multiple duplexes, which would also qualify in this as a multi-household development. Is that a percentage becomes very palatable, very understandable, and very clean for us to be able to enforce that way when we're moving forward. Why the 33% is based off the smallest division of a multi-household unit. So our multi-households are 3 units or more. It's over 2 units. So at the very smallest base, this is what we're going to be seeing. So one of those units would be restricted. And as we, of course, amplify that, that 33% maintains. But at the smallest base, if we chose an increment of 66, therefore we would have 2 restricted homes and 1 not. 66 isn't out of reach. I think that for the nature of what we're talking about, which is local housing, that's really what active employment households and the definitions therein that support what that is. What we're trying to get at is people that live and work in this community. There are, of course, exceptions, retirees, military. The HDHO is actually the Grand County's ordinance that we've adopted and accommodated to try to make work within this. There was quite a bit of work that went into that definition and how that scope works. So there are exemptions, there are accommodations within that AEH. But it's what do we want our town to look like? And if right now 33% is low, but it's very manageable. So that would seem to be the appropriate approach at this point. 66 would mean at a very dramatic basis that we would have 2 local homes and 1 potential home that could be used as a second home or not designed for the market of Moab. That's even a pretty reasonable percentage for some folks, certainly. But if we're getting up into the 80s, 90s, very aggressive, we're likely going to be experiencing a lot of pushback. And this is where it's going to be so great to have Aaron and BAE contributing to really acknowledge in facts what is needed, and then what not only is needed now, but what can we anticipate needing in the future and going forward. There have been a lot of questions at the council. What happens if there's a fractional unit count of a percent? So 33% comes out to 2.6, for example. If that were the case, we do have precedent within our code already that we would take that number, take that decimal number and round, whether it's 0.5 and up or 0.5 and down. So we are able, we're not making this up. We have a number of areas in the code that operate this way already. Before we get to the end, there is one thing I did skip over really quick, is that when we talk about occupancy, I'd like to highlight that really quick. What that word means is, in opposition of ownership, occupancy means when that 33% comes, these units are going to be built and sold or rented at market rate. What this does as an occupancy, whether it's the owner or the people living in it, which it can be either, will need to meet that occupancy requirement. So what it's doing is, by effect, changing the market rate from national or international market rate, which is the biggest problem we're seeing right now. Is there are homes being built clearly not for anybody in the pay scale within Moab, so they're attainable. So what we're trying to approach is attainable housing. There's been a lot of conversation about this term of the missing middle. So there are many opportunities, not as many in Moab, but like Aaron was saying, around the world in our Western regions, for affordable housing. It is dedicated at a certain percentage of AMI. Those are carved aside. What we have are a level or class of income that it cannot qualify for one of these AMI, but it can also not afford the $700, $800 townhome or condos that are being produced. So there's no support or protection on the lower end for this missing middle, and there's no market really being built for them on the higher end. So this missing middle, really what the market rate approach we're hoping to achieve here is. With this ordinance, and Aaron and I have talked a little bit about this, in our planning code, we have a tendency with every ordinance to try to solve every problem. And what that does is it often conflates or it creates issues within the ordinance that we end up not solving any problems because it's not working. We've created too many barriers because we're trying to pack too much into one thing. I think that could be said about some of the ordinance that have gone through in the past. While super well intentioned, we haven't had a great reception to them in the community because they can have been termed as maybe too onerous, too difficult to pencil. I might object to all of those things, but that's the perception. What we're trying to do here is focus on this missing middle element to try to take a first bite. What I think we would want to do, I'm going to scroll back here just a second. When we are trying to, and I think there was a great question at the city council meeting about this, is, well, what are we doing to also look at ownership and affordability? What is the bigger bite or inclusionary zoning? Really carve out some substantial housing for that stake. It might come in the form of a PAD, Planned Affordable Development Ordinance amendment, where we're amending it to be a little bit balanced, particularly if we're getting into the details about parking. Parking restriction on that became one of the factors we heard over and over and again why many developers turned away from the PAD, is because the amount of land it takes to park out at the rate at which we were asking was too high, that the ratio of units to parking, it wasn't able to work well. The city, we did pass a PAD ordinance. It is doable. It is able to calculate and pencil. But there are opportunities where it gets a little complicated, that it's easier to turn away. There's also discussions about a PAD light, so not an amendment to the PAD itself, but a PAD light where we're using some of those components, some of the same materials, but maybe adjusting it in different zones to maybe address it a little bit easier. On-street parking as an option is an example of a PAD light discussion. So anyway, when it comes to occupancy, we can talk about ownership or leasing as qualifying actions. They're going to be at market rate, and additional mechanisms we're working on would hopefully try to attack the different issues we're facing in housing, but to attack them singularly, rather than all at once with one ordinance trying to kind of overwhelm in one-stop fix. So this comes kind of to the end of the presentation here, where our next steps are going to be continuing to work with the Planning Commission and City Council through our workshops, reporting back with BA and the framework that we are drafting, confirmation from our land use attorneys about how the draft is coming out, what the framework is representing in their minds as far as what we're needing to supply or not necessarily needing to, but what would be good to supply. And then really getting down into business of approval. So public hearings and recommendations with following approval. So that is a big mouthful, but really appreciate following, if you could, and everybody at home watching, I really appreciate the participation as well. So at this point, I could maybe dish it back to Kaya, and where you'd like to take this discussion, utilizing Aaron as much as possible while we have him, or having it in an open format. So don't obviously want to keep Aaron too late. We can continue talking. If we don't have any more questions for Aaron, let him go and then discuss further. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Corey. That was really great, and hearing the reasoning behind it and comparisons to other things we and the county have done in the past, I think is particularly useful. Yeah, just like you said, Ruben, Jesso, if either of you have any questions for Aaron before we let him go. Otherwise, we can just sort of have a general discussion about what our thoughts are, what our questions might be moving forward, to sort of take the temperature of the room before we actually have to start making some decisions on these things, which is, I think, always good to do.
I'm excited. That was a really nice presentation. A couple of mouthfuls, definitely. I don't think that I have any questions specifically for you, Aaron, but I do look forward to more of this. I think just general discussion is that I think that Sam fit in perfectly with, the way this lays out, and that things are definite, but treading into this territory is how can we set ourselves up nicely. It's fun.
Jesso, anything from you?
Yeah, I agree with what Ruben said, and I think it's exciting that we're doing this. And yeah, look forward to more in the future. And thank you.
Before Aaron goes, I might just throw this out there as we've been doing so far at a staff level to kind of kick Aaron and Matt off is generating those materials that Aaron talked about as far as what our existing build out for our residential zones are, what we're hoping to do is both what our existing dwelling count are. We should have some information from census and county to generate some of that. And then also what our commercial existing data would be. I think that would be a representation of the unit counts we'd be able to pull from types or averages of commercial spaces. But beyond that, we're going to take a status of what's current and then also that full build out of where we're going. So that's kind of a jumping off point. If any questions, our engineering department's generating that for Aaron and Matt. But yeah, I don't, that's really our first big step. So if that spurs any questions, I just want to kind of throw that out. That's where we're at before we let Aaron go.
Yeah, I think that's great too, Aaron. You were talking about the catch up and the keep up numbers. And I think, say we are considering a 66% figure in the revisions to code. I think that catch up number is going to be particularly important because we can, we basically are justifying the fact that, look, we're already way, way behind as far as workforce or local housing goes compared to what's getting built for, folks who aren't a full-time member of the community here. And I think being able to have those numbers like in every newspaper article about this process and everything, I think that would get ahead of a lot of sort of the shock about maybe that number being high for some folks, just saying, look, this is our best tool to get more housing quickly is in these zones that already allow for it. And we want to make sure that, the ball hasn't already rolled down the hill without us, having things going along with it that are good. So any of those numbers, I know we've had updates to back when we were considering the pad and the county was doing the HDHO, we had numbers of here's needed housing still for residents of Grand County or Moab City. I think all of that would be really useful. And then just from, me as an attorney sitting thinking like we want to make sure that this is nice and tight and legally defensible too. And all of that evidence really goes a long way for, God forbid, we get sued, over this. I think it's going to be critical to have that to bolster the direct connection between what we're doing, why, and where the need is and the specific numbers. So I really appreciate the fact that you all are on that component of it.
Great, thank you for that. Yeah, the main point of the way we structured the scope as it is to provide you a variety of data points to help you figure out how to best craft the policy. And in particular with tasks 2 and 3, we're looking at, under task 2, the sort of ideal of what it would look like, assuming that you can put as much workforce housing into this particular bucket as possible, accounting for the different types of need. But I think that will also provide you with some useful information to use to compare against your other workforce and affordable housing tools as well, kind of thinking about the potential yield from those other sources and then how much you really need to put into the active employment housing policy bucket specifically. And then under task 3, looking at the nexus, as Corey mentioned, we're thinking about that rough proportionality requirement. And if you are required to stick to a strict nexus, we'll be providing the data necessary to understand what that would look like. And so you can, once we've got the data, as part of those meetings, we can talk a little bit more about, well, how do those line up together? And then Corey and staff, as well as Planning Commission and others, will be thinking about, well, how does that really feed into the policy itself? So think of us as a resource. We're here to provide information to help you do your work. We believe in what you're doing, and we're really excited to be part of this process.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Well, thank you, Aaron. If you're ready, we appreciate it. We won't keep you any longer. I think we'll continue to talk a little bit more. But again, thanks very much.
Great. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, that was really great, Corey. Thanks for all that info. And I'm happy that we have Aaron and those folks on the numbers game. Do you guys just want to talk a little bit about maybe, the public comment saying that we should go higher than, I think that's probably the biggest thing to sort of discuss is if you think, so for me, I'm coming at it from a feasibility perspective, having been on the commission long enough that I was a part of the process with the pad. That was really frustrating because it was something that we spent a ton of time and energy and expertise and expert consulting on that really has not been utilized in all those years since it's passed. And I think it was because it was an optional thing that a developer could choose, but of course they're not going to choose to do that unless it's going to still pencil out for them bottom line. And like Corey said, I think maybe there's a little bit of over exaggeration about how onerous some of the requirements are. But certainly if you're not going to choose that option, you're not going to choose that option as a developer. Whereas this time, this is our underlying use by right in the code where it's not, you can do some other thing or you can choose not to do this. It's going to be, if you are choosing to put any multifamily housing in these particular zones over 2 units, then this is what the requirement is. So I'm a little less gun shy, I would say, about making it a firm requirement that's actually really going to make a dent in our housing issues. Because I do think with some of the prices that you can charge for the non-workforce housing restricted occupancy unit or units in these developments, there's still plenty of money to be made for a developer if they decide to do this. And I'm hopeful that they would still decide to do a multifamily development in the zones where they could, even with these sort of new requirements on top. I mean, I don't know how that's felt to you, Corey, taking the pulse from, that list of, that was really helpful to see that list, the chart of what's in the pipeline kind of, and who's waiting on this ordinance. I guess I'm saying something like 66%. I think that the easy divisions makes good sense. We don't want to do like 45 or something like that. I think if that makes sense and that's something that, we could actually have happen, because of course the alternative would be that might have a chilling effect on this kind of development in the zone, where it would just be, we're just going to level this single family house on a really big lot in the R3 and just put a gianter single family house or something. So
that's a really great observation. And that it was actually one of the 2 elements I wanted to follow up on before we concluded. First, and this was, as I was talking with our communications director, the understanding of what we're doing, because there are so many different products. And oftentimes when this is thought of, there is the first thing people think of, there's an affordability component. And the second thing they think of is there's a bonus, which is exactly what our pad is. This is neither of those. There is no affordability. There is no ownership. It's just whoever lives there needs to live there, which is pretty darn reasonable request. So really the only thing this does is combat developments strictly designed as second homes with no intent for local housing. If there's a nicer development, it often has a market rate component that does measure out, and whether it's regionally local, somewhat local. But what this does is it really only it's fighting one thing, and that is second homes designed for folks that don't live here. The reason that's kind of not that we're putting off our snowbirds or anybody that is here second home, and why there's a percentage. We're not saying do away with them. We're just saying of these developments, there's been a disproportional amount being built because there is so much money to be made by them with this international market. is that these units are market rate, just local. Oh gosh, there's a lot of things flying around. I've missed my point with this.
Corey, I
Oh
think
shoot.
maybe this will bring it back. What Kai, I think, was getting at is there a restriction, or can we make a restriction in there that in the R3, you need to build 3 residents? You can't build one giant home.
Oh, I see. What that is something that we could do. You're essentially changing the zoning code, just how we currently allow 1 household, 2 household, and multi-household. You'd be just removing the 1 or potentially the 1 and 2 from these zones, saying it's only multi-household. So if you're building here, that's what the product is. I don't, for this first go around, which with whatever percentage we do come up with, and as we're going around, I don't want to bite off more than we can chew, in a sense that nothing's going to happen or it's going to backfire. That could also get into exclusionary zoning. I don't think it would, for the same reasons we're not doing an inclusionary zoning amendment right now. We're just simply saying this is how we want this zone to be designated. If you want to build 1 household or 2 household, go to our single household residential zone or our 2 household residentials. Don't build 1 households in our R3. However, again, this is the same thing. I don't want to necessarily isolate, is what this would do, is create every historic house that is smaller, maybe it has a bigger lot and a big garden, would become a legal non-conforming use. And those folks would no longer be able to amend those properties, even if it was a slight amendment. So I'd be pretty apprehensive about going that way, but that thought that we're thinking about this, good. That is a good line of thought to explore. But that's maybe where we might run into issues, is we have to think about some of those kind of echoing consequences as we're starting to tweak. Why this, as a single line, it's really such a simple amendment. It does have a lot of repercussions, is a great place to start. Whether the percentage is higher or lower, that's all we're touching on, is just that percentage and occupancy.
And I think that, oh, go ahead, Corey.
There were 2 other things. One was part of the Cane Creek rezone. During that rezone, I thought that there would have been a really good educational opportunity. There was a lot of confusion and misinformation about PUDs, how they operate in the RA1, which is that rural agricultural zone, or they could have operated in any other zone. So as a part of that presentation, I had kind of we were hoping that the result was going to be what it was, but I think there was a lot of discussion and even some commentary that we feel like we were backed up against the wall. We had no choice. This was the only option. And I think I had one matrix image. I'm going to share a screen here that I still am hoping to share with the Planning Commission and the council to help educate, because we're not done with this conversation. We're going to have many, many conversations moving forward. But this is, again, very specific to that one development. But these are essentially the paths that we could have picked for the potential future of that. Hopefully everyone can roughly see that text. I know it might be kind of small. But this column is with that zone, again, RA1, would have been by right. What that RA1 zone would have been with a PUD without any bonuses for density open space, and what that PUD would have been if they did add a little bit more open space or did add an affordability component, and then what the result was that did end up happening. So with these different paths, it was clear from the developer they would have picked one of these. That property would not have remained vacant open space. As you can tell from my background, and I don't mind joking about it, I love seeing cows. I love seeing open space. I'm the number one person that's pro ag. However, that property, at the cost of that ground, it doesn't make sense to remain vacant agriculture or open space, whether it's designated or conservation. So kind of coming down here, we kind of get to what is the result. we can kind of talk about that, is the cost of land would have yielded 1 acre lots with over $1 million per home or per lot, even if they were to sell, with 0 AEH units, no affordable housing or attainable housing, no locals. With a PUD, the cost of land still remained very, very high. Realistic density, so from 9 units, it goes to about 49 units. Sounds pretty good. But based on that and the trends that we've seen, especially if they're geared towards townhome and condos, those are still ranging. Even right now, we're seeing that number going up, but between $600,000 to $1 million per unit just for a townhome or a condo, still yielding 0 local units. With the PUD with an open space or affordability bonus, we'll go with the affordability bonus in this case, that if they built up to 60 to 70 units, 16 or 14, realistically, probably 14 of those would have been restricted. So we're still seeing very high cost, but with a small percentage accommodating for that very low income. So we are getting some low income or 14 to 16 local units. But the prices for everything else in that development are probably still between 500 to 900,000. And those 16 would be at about 60% AMI. That's how this calculation was done. What we saw was RA1/R3 rezone, and we have not approved a development yet. That was also a misconception. We haven't reviewed or approved any plans. It's just the zone. What is even feasibly potential here is you could get at max 165 units more realistically because of infrastructure, because of roads, because of parking. All those things start to contract that buildable, developable area. You're probably in more of a range of 120 to 130 units. But with that, depending on the size, you're getting 43 to 54 local homes with this option. And the ranging market could be anywhere from 200 to 500 with rents for that AMI between 13 to 18 potentially, just based off of this is very simple math. I'm not an economist that way. So if we're just, again, looking at the results, I by no means, are we done with this project or with projects like it? But from the council and planning commission's perspective, I'd like us to acknowledge the good work that has been done by the planning commission, by staff, and even by the developer trying to work with the city. That this developer, he very well could have gone any of these routes, and he could have made it pencil, and he could have made a killing, and he would have done nothing for the community. He did not want that. He chose to go this route, and really, quite frankly, he pushed to go this route and made it happen. It did not have to be the easy choice. But we're yielding 130 doors, and 43 to 54 of those are for locals. So in my mind, a really big win for the community. I understand, I want to see it stay open space. But if we're going to see things go, I'd sure like to see those local doors being put in. So that's my rant.
No, that's good. And Corey, I do think showing and explaining that chart to council would be really good, because I do think, at least just watching the meeting where that was voted on, 2 meetings ago, I do think there was some lingering confusion, and I've definitely heard some lingering confusion just in conversations among, active folks in town about like, oh, we're getting this, or it would have been, as if there was another option that wasn't just the developer just going with a PUD and still putting a whole bunch of homes there that had nothing, no requirements, no agreements for the community. And I think that, it's a bummer. Would have been great in some senses if there could have, remained open space build. Ultimately, our code was written how it was. And you can't, ex post facto things like that. So just making sure, I think it's really critical that people understand that it was going to be a huge development that was very different than it is now, one way or the another. But now we get over 45 new homes that are only available to locals this way. So
Right.
I agree.
And the citizens to be heard, Judy prior to that meeting. Thank you. If you're watching this, really appreciate you watching. Thank you for speaking out. Judy had a number of concerns and confusions because it is confusing, the PUD and the densities and which zones. It was a lot. And Judy, I was hoping to give a more full response to that during that meeting, but at the time, I think the action of the council and the mayor to move on the item, inevitably it did go the way it went, and so it was passed. But we want to take every opportunity we can to educate, because it is complex. And if anybody watching is confused, please call the planning department. I'd love to talk with you and walk through what the perspective is, because I think we're all on the same team here.
Yeah.
So
ultimately, I
that
think
was-
it's just what's discretionary and what isn't. And that's, I think, the kicker sometimes is it's not discretionary that something
Right.
happens. But what that something ends up being is where we can have that negotiation. So, and really thank you, Corey, and to all the rest of the staff for doing the work of getting that stuff, articulated to everybody.
So
Really,
my one last comment, I won't, go ahead, Ruben.
No, go ahead.
Just real quick, as far as numbers go, as far as seeing numbers and having those in the newspapers, it makes it a lot more palatable, especially for the community to see that this is the only direction you can go that is positive for us. It'll be easy.
Yeah, it's there were some comments about, feeling, and some of those comments were pulled back. It was kind of in just phraseology, and then those phrases were pulled back. But the idea that we were kind of on the defense here, while of the options, this was the option that we're kind of seeing. It was vacant or this. The reality is it was here or a couple others beyond it.
Yeah.
So I think I want the council to feel really good about what they're doing, as well as the planning commission, that we're doing good work, and we're trying to be proactive. So everyone's commitment and within the community, the citizens, everybody, we appreciate it. And we want to continue to do that. On that particular note, my closing component with getting back to this ordinance and what our discussion is our communication and outreach with the real estate community. When this resolution went into effect, we got a lot of calls into the planning office that were very worried, a little bit confrontational. What are you doing? Why are you doing this? Most of that all is coming from a root of not quite understanding the whole concept, because we're not adjusting the rate at which you're renting or selling these. It's just the content of who's there. It to some degree affecting that bottom line, right? Like some folks were thinking it would. So every conversation that we've had with folks coming in that may have come in on a little bit more of an aggressive note, once they've understood within the real estate community, have left feeling that's reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we want to maintain throughout this. We want it to be everyone walking away feeling, yeah, that's about reasonable. And this is where that balance of where does that percentage go, that we all still feel this way, that that's reasonable, that's doable, yet it is pushing us to a keep up or a catch up even, a number. I think I really appreciate the way Aaron phrased that, because that's what we need to do. Is we're already behind, so we do need to catch up.
That said, Corey, I think, some takeaways from public engagement and public comments with both us, and then, eavesdropping on stuff and on city council meeting, is that they felt with the Cane Creek development that 33 was too little. So I think for the times when that was a completely discretionary on behalf of the developer action, instead of something that we have the final sort of arbitration over, or that's a code requirement, like what we're going to be doing here. I think maybe playing catch up when we have the say to say this is the requirement in code for this zone. We're not down zoning. We're not saying actually this is all single family now and you have to apply for and have a legislative discretionary overlay put on, which is similar to what the county has as far as overnight accommodations. We're just saying this is something that we've noticed. This is something that is justifiable based on these numbers, that were being provided by our consultants to get in it. So I think because it's not as much of something like the pad. I'm definitely right now inclined to raise that percentage, because I still think you can get a heck of a lot as a developer out of it. You can still get buyers buying from wherever, and renting to locals, which we need to, which is a big difference from the county's density overlay or density ordinance, where it's ownership, not occupancy. So like you said, it seems like upping that percentage so we really actually make a big dent, just because I think this is one of the bigger, it's not like the one C2 lot in town or whichever zone it is. We have like 3 lots or something. This is a lot of space, that we're already seeing this happen. And I think it would be in everybody's best interest in the community to really like make this work in that way.
And we saw from that current projects chart, there's quite a few of projects, and some of these were kind of in the works prior to the resolution. Some have started after, but all of them have gotten on board, and they're perfectly compatible with it, which is great that we can go forward and with what we have, they're like, yep, let's do it. That makes sense. We've only had one project debate pulling their project because of this.
Mhm.
And that was a project that was, I mean, he's very open, very nice gentleman and developer, but he was coming in saying, I am making second homes for people not here. And that was his development plan and the way it was going to work for him. So he did struggle with that. But as I've been working with them, he also was going to pull it before he kind of had that same misunderstanding. I think there was more of an affordability or ownership tie. But now his project is back in. So even our most kind of adversarial use in regard to this ordinance, even we were able to coordinate that yet. So he's still moving forward with that at this point. So if that doesn't talk about how willing we are to work with, I mean, which is what this ordinance is, but like Kai is saying, there is more room. There's more room to go. And I think BAE, they are going to give us the backing to say this higher percentage is relevant because of this. So when we do get from whether it's real estate community or the development community pushback saying, I thought it was 33, I thought that was reasonable, this 55, I can't do that. Well, here's all the data of why it's gone that direction.
Yeah.
I really doubt it's going to drop below 33. It could, but I doubt it. So if it does increase, we're going to at least have the backing there. So feel very comfortable with.
So Corey, would that apply to the ones that are sort of on notice right now in the matrix as well? It would.
Great question.
Yeah.
Great question. The new percentage would not. All of those that have submitted are now submitted, and we have the working concept that they're at 33. So we'll finish those current projects at the status quo that we're at. So with the work that's being done to develop towards that ordinance, everything after the ordinance will go to that new number, but everything prior will remain at the 33.
So say someone puts in an application tomorrow, which percentage would they?
33.
And why is 33 that number? Is that what was in the pending ordinance notice?
No, right, which is a great question. No, in the pending ordinance resolution, it said some percentage of units. At the time, it was drafted in a way that left us hanging, which was a way to move that resolution forward. But okay, what happens to our fourplexes that come in and they are ready to develop, they're ready to build, and they have to, and we can't hold them up. We had to pick a number. We've been pushed, and that's what we found with that development agreement is we were pushed because we had to figure it out. Legally, we couldn't hold up these processes. So that's where we came to, and we had to base it off something. So the explanation I gave in this presentation was how we came to that 33, what the enforcement, what the approval, what the defaults are when it is and is not working. So the framework that we saw in the Cane Creek development agreement is very representative of where we're at, because we can because we can move forward at this point with a percentage that would be different. We don't right now have any backing to say that it would be different. So for example, if we went to 66, it's still kind of it meets all the same criteria, except at the time that we were developing that development agreement and working on these projects, which submitted basically right after this resolution, some of them, I mean, within days, that was where we were at. So we could have maybe picked a more aggressive number up front, but that was the determination we made at this time. So I could check with our consulting land use attorneys that if there are fluctuations in our understanding. So if BA comes back and they say, well, so far it's looking like it's be more around 45 or 70, do we adjust to that new percentage without it being worked through the process? That's a great question. I've been operating under the assumption that these will maintain at their current, because what that would do is mid-process. So an application that's already done their financing, they've already dedicated and working on the deed restriction requirements. We get new information. We are not able to change our minds when they're already halfway through a development review, because that could change the entire function of their project, if that makes sense. So if that were the case, we could, in essence, delay them at every interval saying, well, there's new data, so you need to do this. Well, there's new data, you need to do this.
In the example of
So
those,
it's an interesting question.
in those fourplexes, can we put some clause in there so that we can always round up, so that, you know, in a fourplex, we can get 2 units instead of just 1?
We could conceivably, in the ordinance, we could put that in there that if it's 0.1, so, 2.1, it's going to be 3, if that makes sense. However, that is in conflict with much of the precedent we have in our other ordinances that are of the same nature, our PAD and our WAHU, which are both inclusionary zoning ordinances and have gone through the burden of essential nexus. So I would not feel very comfortable deviating from the precedent of those. But again, I think Ruben even brought up that question, or maybe it was you, Jesso, a while back. And so I had thought about that, and we went in and explored that a little bit. And it turns out this is what came of that is it kind of ended up being just a 0.5, and that make or break roundup. So like parking, we do have a precedent there where if it is 0.1, we round up for parking, because you can't have a third of a space, you need to round up. But with these type of units and how sensitive it is, it makes sense to draft it this way.
So Corey, sorry, I'm asking you tons of questions tonight. So the 33%, was that was a decision that staff made that's now being applied as if it were code? Something about that just seems strange to me. Yep.
No, it's something that we
percent now. How do you go forward with that? If it should be 66 now. Like anything before would kind of stick to its 33.
Yes, so that could be a way of doing it. Which if BAE came in, or we just decide now, we're treading on some arbitrary designations there. However, I understanding, of course, it have been perceptively arbitrary to begin with. But what we did at the beginning was off the rationale that I kind of proposed during that presentation. That's how we came to that. So that 33 was an agreement between the developer of Cane Creek. At the same time, we were saying this is what, because we had to propose something to him. Again, he didn't come to us. I mean, there was some back and forth dialogue, but we were the ones that wrote the agreement. So we were the ones that first wrote 33. So in a certain sense, I guess there is precedent there. I don't want to emphasize that too much, not saying everything in Cane Creek is what we're doing. Much of it is hard work from our consulting land use attorneys that they've helped us draft the parameters and framework. So we are maintaining that, but if there's any individual provisions in there that are specific to that development, they stay there. Why we picked 33, it seemed an approachable number. It was a percentage quantity, and it was the smallest divisible option for multi-household. It was the first bite that we didn't think we were going to get totally blown back with. So that's, to be honest, that was, we based it in a rationale, and that rationale was based off of trying to get us through this resolution period.
So if now we have the rationale based on all those factors about the divisibility, about the need, about the underlying number of projects that we could foreseeably have come before us, could we change it to 66 from here on out? For that, I'm just
Really?
thinking, we're thinking
Yeah,
April, right? Like there are
I'm
a
in favor.
lot of development proposals that could get in there before April. And I feel like
Right.
that the benefit of the pending ordinance. I don't think I realized that there were still things going forward under a number that was just set by the city, because like when we did the overnight accommodations moratorium, for example, it wasn't proceed as we're sort of drafting. It was like stop, basically.
Which is a great observation, which is they're both non-exaction territory.
Yeah.
But why this is somewhat different, a little bit more sensitive, is because we are continuing to allow something, but at a percentage, versus with the OAs, we said no. So from the drafting of that moratorium, it was always no and going to continue to be no in the ordinance. What we said was, we want something in the middle. And then that's what they approved. And so now we're trying to deal with something in the middle until we figure out what it is. And then from there on, but your point is well taken. I think I will reach out to our consulting attorneys to see. I think we would have to have rational basis, and we'd have some burdens of proof to deviate. And then from there, it would be at the moment we would probably have some formal action, whether it was amendment to the resolution or sort of addendum of some kind, that then formally changes it. Then from the moment forward, like you're saying, until April, for between February and March, we would adjust at that point. So your question is valid. It's just a matter of, I'm not sure if we can or can't.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think that would probably be the same question that a lot of city council members would have, or the ones that are definitely more, interested in the idea of, any sort of density change, whether it's an allowed, use by right or not, actually kind of getting that percentage up there. I remember hearing a lot that there was concern that 33 was too little for what it was that, they phrased it as what we were allowing, which kind of it isn't, but it was too little for what we'd want, maybe. This is really informative, Corey. Thank you.
This has been really great discussion.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm not sure if the commission would entertain it, but it appears somebody has popped into the waiting room. We are not in citizens to be heard, and we don't have any requirement to open it back up. But hey, we're a pretty small town, so I don't know. I don't know how that works, if we'd even be able to, and if it with in-person meetings when folks come to visit us, we've sometimes opened up that opportunity. So I'm not sure. And without Summer here, our city recorder, I can't say for certain.
I think because we are actually not in a formal quorum planning commission meeting, maybe I would certainly be fine with it. I think more public engagement when possible. It doesn't hurt. So if the other commissioners agree, I'm totally fine with it.
Bring them in.
Jess, so that sounds okay? Okay. All right. We'll let them in. Wait for microphone to start. Christina, I'm not sure if you can hear us. We can't see you and we can't hear you, but if you are on, we're in the planning commission meeting. We've moved to the end of the agenda into our discussion item, but the Planning Commission has opted to hear if you are a citizen to be heard and missed the original citizen to be heard portion of the meeting. So if you have something, feel free to unmute and share. Okay, Christina, we haven't seen your mute come off or your video come on. We'll give you a second to maybe reorient your settings. But if we don't hear from you in a second, we'll assume that you're just trying to view the meeting rather than participate.
And Christina or whoever you can always feel free to email too if for some reason you're having technical issues, and we will absolutely make sure that all the commissioners, the relevant staff, and then we can share those with the public at the next meeting as well. All right.
Okay.
She went away.
Dropped off. So I guess that answers that.
All right. Well, anybody have anything else? Do we have future agenda items?
Rational basis, as far as that goes, because I know that it can't be arbitrary, but having 66 be a good number considering the consultant, like we have a lot of catch up to go. Considering catch up, is that rational enough if we're leading towards that? Because that's expert opinion, that's the game we're going to be playing, and then 66 can be lowered down to 33.
Right. No, I think that's a great observation. And I would agree with that. I think if once we have our data supported from the engineers and BAE takes a look at that data and says, oh yeah, we're in a realm that is likely higher than that 33. The 66 again is a rational basis on processing, enforcement, static, repeatable. So for me, the 33 or 36 are even in that approach, but it would take the support from BAE saying we're in a different realm, which sounds like it could be achieved once he does process the data or they process the data. So I think that my homework is going to be twofold. One is to reach out to our consulting land use attorneys, see if that would be an option within this resolution period. And then B, back out to BAE and see if that data could yield something that is even, again, quote unquote, roughly proportional. That it's used in a different context, of course, but if we're in a roughly proportional arena to make that adjustment.
Yeah. Playing it safe, anybody who's going to apply should stick to 66. Or planning commissioner.
You're on mute, Kaya, sorry.
I was just saying, well, we can't actually say that, but
Should from me.
if it were me. Cool. Thank you, everybody. Real quick, Corey, what do we have future agenda items other than this? Which, thank you for the calendar, by the way. That helps my brain process is what we're looking at here.
Right. So, of course, this is going to be a major topic until the end of March. But beyond that, we have, I think, almost 16 applications. Most of those are coming to you as the land use authority. Some are going directly to city council. There isn't anything prepared for the next meeting. There is an engagement that the city, me specifically, is participating, and other members of city staff with the Grand County Strategic Visioning Group. And with that, we've had some exercises that I've been asked to dissipate to our planning commission and appointed officials to more completely get our response from the city. Because again, this is a county-oriented planning exercise, but my opinions, I was wanting to include your opinions along with mine, and we can take the average of what that is. So I was going to try to get that exercise out to the planning commissioners. And then for anybody that's interested in that, contacting the Grand County Planning Department for opportunities for engagement as a public member, how to get involved and participate in that arena. So they have many engagement. I think there's one actually being held at Star Hall. There's a lot of stuff going on. But as far as relevant items, I think we're still working them through the development review team process. We are getting close to a few. Actually, as a matter of fact, we will have one, the Super 8 remodel. The working title for that remodel is a new property owner building the Moab Adventure Hotel. Not the final name, but it's kind of the working name, as we have the Moab Adventure Inn. But it's the Super 8 remodel. So you will be seeing that next time. That is a site plan application that'll be coming to you. I lied. It might be a level 1. There's a lot going on. Level 1s are staff level approval. Level 2 are planning commission. So I might have overexerted you guys already.
It's not like you have a lot on your plate right now, Corey. We're
Right.
totally. Go ahead, Jessica.
Well, going through all the minutes in preparation for tonight to approve them, which we didn't do, but it refreshed my memory on a lot of stuff that we have done. And the sign ordinance that we passed, or that we referred to city council, there was a question in there about the high school's new sign and if it was in compliance with the dark skies ordinance. And I'm just curious, follow up on that, if they turn it off at a certain point, or if it stays on all night.
Right. No, that's a great, and I recall that. And so in the larger context, the sign ordinance has been pushed because of the very full council agendas. So there's often more items that are waiting to go to council than are actually on the agenda, because they're trying to keep it at a reasonable length. So we've been waiting in the wings. I'm hoping to get that on their agenda in March. The first meeting of March would be my optimal approval. We're going to have discussions about the fuel price change signs. We had left off on that. I've done additional research in the meantime about potentially even lowering and dimming those numbers further. So we had them dimmed to a 15%. I've coordinated with the YesCo on a 10% dimming, and we may even take it further between a 5 and a 7. In the context of the other light that's going on, it's going to get quite dim. So it's going to be actually a matter of, we're going to have to keep it bright so that it doesn't get totally lost. But we're trying to be balanced, very fair about what is reasonable, but also preserving our dark skies that way. About the school sign, no, that school sign does not meet the dark sky code or our regular sign code. There's an intermittent and flashing movable LED sign, which is kind of what this whole sign ordinance was all about. That doesn't comply in both of those fashions. However, the school property is not directly within the zoning jurisdiction of the city. I know that's a little complicated, but state lands like Sitla and school properties can voluntarily comply, and often do, with zoning and building code, but they are held in a different arena, which is a state arena, that they can opt out if they wish, unfortunately. So they will comply as it is something that they're wanted. But if there's something like a sign they want, and we've talked about them, they are able to place that sign regardless of our ordinances. But what they have done and been willing to do is work with us on the mitigation of that. So in the time that they installed that sign, they've reduced the brightness at night. And then I think they've also were supposed to have a off time. I think it was like at, 10 p.m. it turns off, or midnight it just turns off completely. I'm not sure where that's at, because again, it's not really within my jurisdiction to enforce, but it is of course a mitigation of, hey, we're neighbors here. Let's all do what's reasonable. And I think so far they've been really willing to do that. But of course, they're very excited about their sign, and it's very flashy, and so they want
Shiny
to
and
operating
bright.
during the day.
Yeah.
So
Well, I mean, I
yeah.
think not only you've got state land right there, you've got a little bit farther down 400 East, you have pockets of county. And I think in general, you know, when developments come up, there is some misconception from the community of what's county and what's city and who's responsible. You know, there's no signage like leaving city or entering the county, you know, and I think for us, you know, I think at some point there was talk about annexation of these little pockets and making some of the county city, and whether or not, you know, that is anywhere on the radar at any point.
To
But, you
control the
know, I
signs,
think,
right?
what's that?
Annexing to control the signs, right?
No, but annexing pockets of the county that are completely surrounded by the city.
Yeah.
You know, so
Right.
that if you live off of 400 East down, you know, over by the Maverick there, you're in the
Mhm.
county.
Mhm.
And yet you live and you work essentially in the city.
Mhm.
It came to my attention a lot when I worked at the polls last year because we only had city elections and all these people came in wanting to vote. And they're
Right.
like, no, well, you technically live in the county, you can't vote.
Right.
And
Yeah,
I
I
think,
spend like 80% of my time on community Facebook pages just saying, nope, actually, that was the county. Nope, actually, that was Jesso's seen it.
right. Well, and it's like the development at the end of Cane Creek, right? Again, it's county, but it's completely surrounded. It's a peninsula, essentially. You know, it's not connected. You have to go through the city to get there.
Yeah.
Right.
And it also affects the
Uh,
city substantially, because I'm assuming they're going to tie into city water and sewer.
Maybe. Yep. That's a very interesting development. But yeah, with as far as that, if kind of where our current city limit maps are, that's all of our current zoning maps and parcel maps all represent that pretty well. We're pretty well consolidated. If you think about it, everything from south of the bridge, north of the south map, that's mostly city. There are, of course, like Jess was saying, pockets. But then, of course, we have a stem of Mill Creek that goes down to the USU campus area. So apart from that, it's fairly consolidated, but then there is this big peninsula. The general plan 2017 update, we adopted an annexation policy plan, which identified basically everything north of Mill Creek and the 191 intersection is planned to at some point be annexed in the city. That is the annexation map. But at this point, the city is not pursuing annexation of any properties. Property owners can come to the city and say, I want to be annexed. We coordinate that with the county and do a annexation agreement. And we've done a few of those in the last couple of years. But yeah, that'd be the hope, to consolidate so that the boundaries of jurisdiction make more sense, where we have, like you're saying, even islands of single parcels that are city in an island of county, or county and island of city, and that becomes difficult with nuisances or complaints, violations. It is complex, but yeah, our little valley, we've got a whole lot of intermingling between San Juan Grand and the city.
Yeah, no, that I'm glad to hear that there's been discussions with the high school. I don't live over there. I know there's others here who do and are very intimately acquainted with the nighttime brightness of the high school sign. But that definitely, it seems like something that, while not even a city government matter, is just sort of a common courtesy. Let's advocate on behalf of the folks who it looks like daylight across the street from that sign at 12 p.m. I've driven by. So cool. Good to hear that the sign code's getting back on there. I think that's really good, particularly as we're coming into sort of like new business season too. There's going to be new businesses opening who I'm sure would appreciate some really clear guidance on what they can and can't do as far as signage. All right. Thank you, everyone who showed up. Thanks, Corey, and thanks for all the info about the R3 and R4 amendments. It's exciting to see that things are rolling along, and appreciate you dealing with all of the current applicants to just make sure that everybody's on the same page now. It sounds like you've definitely won some folks over with clear explanations, which is great. So
Speaking of winning
Thanks,
people
everyone.
over, do you have any, how are you doing on other people in the planning department?
Oh, thank you.
yeah,
Ruben.
who's the new planner?
We have hired Jessica Thacker. She is I'm not remembering exactly how long of a local, but has been in Moab for a little while now. I hope she's supposed to be starting Monday, so I hope that's okay. I'm announcing her that she has made her accommodations with her current prior employer. But I'm not gonna lie. I'm very excited for Jessica to join us. So I think the anticipation she should be starting Monday as the assistant planner. And with that, I have accepted the planning director position for the city of Moab. So we are in a dynamic now to hopefully move forward, really addressing the flow of work the way we should. So very excited about that.
Okay, congrats, man. Love it. Small town, your career skyrockets much quicker than you.
Yeah, that's right.
That's
Well,
exciting. So she'll be at our meetings from now on then.
Right.
Great.
And
Well,
of course, we to notice here as well, had Jill and Jeremy Lynch join the planning commission. So we did miss them this meeting, but certainly moving forward, excited to have a full planning commission once again.
Yay.
Wow.
All right. Thank you, everyone. I will adjourn this February 10th meeting of the Moab City Planning Commission at 7:53 p.m. Good discussion. Thank you.